Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. I hope you're all loving my Gesellschaft Deutsche Chemiker green tie with the periodic table on, and the reason I'm wearing it is not that I'm just a chemistry nerd, but I also wanted to tell you it's International Year of the Periodic Table, as defined by the UN and UNESCO, so we should all be celebrating that, even if we can't celebrate everything else. I wanted to share with you today some inputs from the Royal Society of Chemistry and from EuChemS about open access and Plan S. Both organisations are positive about open access, and the RSC is a publisher. We've been trying to work towards open access for some years now, actually, since about 2007. And I wanted to say something about how our open access transitions are panning out. So just a word about EuChemS. EuChemS is a federation of 48 national chemical societies. Some of those are in the same country, obviously, and it represents about 160,000 chemists. The RSC is a member of EuChemS, and both a learned society and a professional body for chemists in the UK and Ireland, and we have around 55,000 members in 124 countries. The draft policies, and they are very shortly to be published, about Plan S from EuChemS and the Royal Society of Chemistry are very similar and cover very similar things, and a lot of the things have been mentioned today, and I don't think there'd be any surprises in there particularly for anyone. I won't say a lot about learned societies because Rosh spoke a lot earlier about the value of learned societies to things. Just to say that as the RSC, we were the first chemical society, and dissemination of knowledge was always part of our mission right from the beginning. But that doesn't mean that any society, and I say this from a society viewpoint, that any society has a God-given right to continue. People do have to change, and they have to adapt to the changes, and they have to make sure that they're relevant and doing the right things for their organisations. So in terms of what we do, apart from all the society type things we do as a publisher, and also as a society thing, we publish 44 journals, about 100 books a year, and also databases, but we publish a lot of things for teachers and school children and other things as well as that. Lots of you will know this, but chemistry is perhaps unusual in that the very best quality of the publishing output in journals is really covered by the three main chemical societies as publishers, or the publishers that publish for them. So the American Chemical Society, the German Chemical Society, and the RSC. And we three organisations have also collaborated to make freely available the ChemArchive repository. We have another specific issue in chemistry, which other people have mentioned, but in chemistry it's particularly acute, the China issue. You saw a graph earlier that had a slightly less steep curve for the growth in articles from China. This is the growth in chemistry articles from China. It will soon be followed by a similar but slightly slower growth from India. You can already see India as the orange one, the third one down there at the moment coming. It's a slower burn in India, but it will happen. This is one very good example of why subscription-based publications are not going to work in chemistry for sure forever. So that's something that we just have to deal with. So anyone who publishes a lot of articles from China, like we do, is going to have a lot more volume every year. So China's R&D spend is set to overtake the EU's this year and is fast approaching the US levels of spend. It's got the highest number of researchers and the largest producer of scientific research articles. We were really shocked some years ago when we visited the first university in China that had more undergraduates and more postgraduates in chemistry than the whole of the UK. And of course there are lots of those now in China. So it is quite a power force. And India will be very, very much the same, as I said. The impact on us as the RSC, as you can see, we publish about 40% of our content that we publish is from China. If you look at the content publishing pie charts for ACS and GDCH, they'd be slightly different with regional things. Obviously, the ACS one has much higher US content, but basically we're facing quite similar things. Also, so far, despite what all the people do to try and talk about open access and everything else, it's not very, very well known about open access and Plan S in our chemistry community. In the physical sciences community, you can see from that chart, the blue ones are the ones that publish in subscription sense, and the red ones are the ones that publish in gold open access, immediate open access. Physical sciences and engineering are way behind all the others on that. So we have some issues with our community. They are becoming much more familiar with OA. They do support the concept, but a lot of people don't publish with gold open access. We're seeing evolving author behaviour due to funding mandates in some regions, librarian support and payment options, society supports, and growing number of OA publication outputs. I won't go through that very much, but the Gold OA Chemistry Journal landscape is relatively small and mostly from societies, and there's more coming along for sure. So at the RSC, our open access portfolios, we have 3 gold open access journals. 22% of our 35,000 articles, 40,000 articles are in those. But our flagship journal, Chemical Science, is free to read and free to publish in, with the RSC covering all the charges for that. And it's a delight that Professor Meyer has published in that journal. We publish the largest gold open access chemistry journal, which is RSC Advances, which publishes about 5,000 articles. We flipped this journal in 2016, and I'll say a bit about that in a minute. And we've more recently developed a read and publish model in partnership with our customers, and I'll say a bit more about that. So all of that means that in 2017 we published over 25% of our content as Gold OA. That's just under 10,000 articles. It's very small compared with big publishers. But you contrast that to 6 years ago, we published fewer than 50 gold open access articles. So that doesn't sound like terribly slow or a failure to me, but still, we'll stick with that. And this is an example of what happens when you flip a journal to gold open access. We were publishing about 14,000 articles in RSC Advances. It grew incredibly quickly and was a very inclusive journal. But when it was in a subscription sense, we decided to flip it to gold open access, and overnight the submission of articles dropped by half. It's still a success. The number of articles from China went up. The number of articles from India absolutely bombed. And that's with the first 2 years of that, we offered discounted APCs of £500 for sort of developed world and 250 for developing, and then obviously waivers on top of that. So that level of publishing hasn't really recovered since then, but also that RSC Advances had built up a huge loyalty amongst its authorship. But when we asked authors to pay an APC, they didn't all see that's something they were able to do. They had alternative subscription or hybrid models to use, so they used them. And that was at a time when there wasn't actually a direct competitor to RSC Advances. So having said all that, I think if we flip that now, it might be very different, but also there are other competitors in there as well. So something about read and publish model, I won't read all of this out by any means, but our read and publish model has 2 parts, a fee for subscription content and a fee that allows authors to publish open access. The publish fee is based on historical data for the publication output and of that institution or group, and the discount is applied to the APCs to manage the cost of implementation. And the read fee is on a per article basis, so it's directly linked to the amount of content behind the paywall. So there's a linear decrease in the read fee if the percentage of OA content in our hybrid journal package increases. So that should facilitate a smoother move to OA. So the more read and publish customers we have, the lower the read fee becomes for all of those. We've got 9 countries involved with those, not all countrywide deals. The first one we had outside of Europe was MIT, and we were very glad to have that. And we've got about 50 institutions on that at the moment and growing. But what happens with those organisations that actually have those models? If we look at some data here, it's quite interesting. Sorry, it's quite a complicated graph, and it has got at least one rounding error I've seen in it. So the first number column, the percentage of country articles that are OA, that's fairly explanatory. And the other 3 columns add up to be 100% of, in Sweden's case, the 90%, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. So in Sweden and Austria, we've got 13 and 7 institutes, respectively, on an R&P deal. Sweden now publishes 90% of us, what they publish with us in OA form. Austria, very similar. It's important to note that even though all those authors could publish open access, and we tell them, we actually automatically tell them, some of them choose not to. I don't know why. UK has a relatively high percentage of OA content supported by mandates, and about 20% of UK institutes have an R&P deal. Broadly speaking, we see Europe as being mandate-driven, and it likes hybrid journals, and Read and Publish is working in those places that have it. And we believe other publishers are seeing similar results. So Springer Nature have said before that in the 4 European countries they have similar deals. Around 70% of the articles published in those journals were in Gold OA. However, China supports OA in a different way. Of our OA articles published via all routes, around 40% is from China. But the vast majority of this is in RSC Advances. They don't publish OA in the hybrid route, but they do publish in those journals, but they don't publish open access in those journals. But they do support Gold open access journals they see value in. Currently there are no mandates in China, of course, but as was mentioned before, things could change and things will change in China, I'm sure. Indian researchers are often disincentivized to publish OA, and they have limited funds. So 20% is actually quite a high number from India, and a lot of those will have waivers as well. So, sorry, I've gone through that. There were a few concerns from chemists. They've already been talked about really through a lot of the things that people have said today, and I won't go over all of those again. Many of those appeared in that article, that open letter from 1,500 researchers that was mentioned earlier. That input, I can say honestly, that input was not influenced by any of the societies. It was absolutely grassroots feedback. So just a couple of observations and recommendations. We can't say that we don't. It's just the same as the last talk, actually. We work in a global market. A full global transition would be very difficult to accomplish overnight. The majority of the estimated 4 million publishing researchers will need to alter aspects of their behaviour. 85% of the entire journal market, about 250,000 journals, will need to transition their business models. And so that will be a large-scale transition of funds and an awful lot of organisation to do. It's not to say we shouldn't do it. And different regions within this global market are subject to different policy, political and market forces. So we have to be careful about that. We see Read and Publish things as very much a transition and helping the transition, but we also see the hybrid things as very much part of the transition. I know there's frustration from the Coalition S about they feel that that's slowing down the transition, but we feel that it is actually growing the number of articles. And there are some very specific issues. You know, even if China does agree to pay open access fees, currently we're publishing about 10,000 articles from China. If they paid our full open access fees for those, they'd be paying us about £16 million. I'm not telling you what they do pay us at the moment, but I can promise you it is nothing like £16 million. And there are lots of other organisations that would be in those sorts of places. So really, that was what I was going to say, and thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for your attention. Right.